Superman and the Fantastic Four First Steps. What a time to be a comic book movie fan. I know I put verses in the title of this video. I put it in, like, quotation marks because I'm not really trying to pit these movies against each other. I do have a preference, which I'll reveal at the end. I mean, people who know me, like, probably who have talked to already know what my preference is, but these movies have been on quite a journey. The feature live action films based on these characters. The Christopher Reeve Superman movies of the late 70s and 80s, the first couple at least set the standard for superhero films as we know them, and then three had its detractors, and then four just doesn't exist. That's how bad it is. It's terrible. Just Superman 4. But then the 90s, there was some development hell. I think there were attempts to make a fifth Superman movie, and meanwhile you had that 94 Fantastic Four movie, or 93, 94, which was filmed solely to retain the rights to the characters for the big screen. Such a shady thing to happen, such a shame. And I know people who have seen the that unreleased film say that it's the best adaptation of the characters, pre 2025 Fantastic Four release, and like I'm not really sure about that. The effects, from what you can see, certainly had a ways to go, but the documentary about that film, the people involved at least seemed like they were passionate. The actors who were involved seemed like they were really into the project. So it was a shame that they were just, tossed aside, I guess you could say. And then 2000s, you have the Tim Story Fantastic Four films. I watched those growing up. I got into Marvel around the time the Marvel Ultimate Alliance video game came out. Before then, I'd only seen the Spider-Man films, really, the Tobey Maguire ones. I was a fan of those. And then Ultimate Alliance showed me that, whoa, there are all these other characters in this world. And so, renting all those Marvel movies that were around at the time, and this was pre MCU. And I remembered having a good time watching these 2000s Fantastic Four movies, but having rewatched them recently, they are perhaps too goofy in places. Human Torch is not really likable at all in the first film, giving Ben Grimm such a hard time when Ben is having this arc where he is struggling about looking like a monster in the face of others, and Human Torch is just being so mean, and just he gets angry at the rest of the team for not caring enough about fame. It's just super off-putting. He does get humbled a bit in Rise of the Silver Surfer, but of course in that film Galactus is turned into a fucking cloud for some reason. And meanwhile, Superman Returns, sort of a reboot, but also really trying to lean into the Christopher Reeve Superman movies, saying it's a sequel to the first couple films, which I think was really to its detriment, that it felt like it was trying to say it's that same universe, but wasn't 100% convincing about it. There are some things that didn't feel one to one to me anyway. And there are moments that people love, of course, heroic moments that Superman has in that film, but it didn't check all the boxes for everyone. And then come the 2010s, we have Man of Steel, Zack Snyder's stamp on Superman. The color palette is more gray, more dark, and at the time, if you're watching it as a teenager, like I did, it was kind of easier to embrace, at a time when a teenager might be feeling more alone, and this Superman is feeling more alone and isolated. But when you watch it way later, or even at that time, people noticed around then, Jonathan Kent is not really likable. The tornado scene is ridiculous, and then there's so much destruction, which feels like it's trying to overcompensate for the lack of that sort of thing in Superman Returns. And then you get Fantastic Four 2015, or Fant Four Stick as it's stylized. And I remember in college hanging out with people, and there was the trailer, and one of my friends was like, they Nolanized Fantastic Four, and someone else said, well, I would actually say Snyderized, and because Zack Snyder was the latest thing. Christopher Nolan, I would say his Dark Knight films, while successful, perhaps had this unintended effect that made people over at DC and Warner Brothers think, oh, people love when the movies are darker, sort of taking the wrong message there. And we all know how Batman v Superman ended up. Um, I'm personally not a fan of that. And then Justice League, unfortunately, all the stuff that happened there, that film got butchered, though it later got a resurgence with the 4-hour Snyder Cut, which was the version that should have been put out, really. Maybe with some trimming, the end of that. I'm not really sure how much I would have liked the direction it would have gone after that. But yeah, these properties in feature films have had these trajectories, and now we're at a point where it feels so right where they're at now, in my opinion. And again, I'm going to keep this as non-spoiler as possible. I might not even need to mention spoilers for these movies. I'll start with Superman 2025, formerly titled Superman Legacy, which I can understand why they dropped the title. That makes it sound more like a Lego sequel. I'm fine with it just being called Superman. And this was so highly anticipated. I think it's a really good course correction for live action DC movies. There's some things where, maybe having watched Man of Steel beforehand could be distracting for people. Maybe if you've never seen a Superman movie before, you'll want to watch this one first, because if you've seen Man of Steel, you might feel super aware of how blatant it feels that they're trying to avoid some of the issues of it. Like, Superman trying to avoid buildings getting crushed and being like, hey, everyone okay? And I mean, that's fine. It's what Superman would do, trying to, make sure everyone's okay. And I understand that the destruction in Man of Steel, some of that he couldn't control. Zod was just so powerful. I mean, it's been so long since the last time I've seen it. It's probably been a few years, but that's what I remember of it. But yeah, in Superman 2025, you might be aware of that stuff on a meta level, but overall, I think this is a really great introduction. Lots of people already know the origin of Superman, and this kind of drops you into the middle of the action. It begins with opening text that gives you all the context you'll need about where Superman is in his crime fighting career and how experienced he is at this point. And Crypto, this is a character that people in the late 2000s would have rolled their eyes at. We were so the Dark Knight influence that we were like, yeah, that could never work in live action. But we're at a time where, because we've had Avengers, Guardians of the Galaxy, Howard the Duck, we are more accepting of a character like Crypto. And I loved seeing Crypto in this. There were moments where the some of the crashing involving him, like crashing against Superman and such, got a little bit old. But there's some jokes like that where it felt a bit too Guardians of the Galaxy, and it's James Gunn, so some of that humor is going to be in here. But I think it was spread out enough. There are two songs that play during the movie where it's like, oh, this is such a James Gunn thing to do. You know, have a song during this action sequence, have a song when the credits are coming. And I've only seen the film once, but I imagine that maybe on rewatches, the Guardians of the Galaxy similarities won't stand out as much. Other than those, the only other minor gripe I have is that Superman, when he's getting interviewed by Lois, this is really early on in the movie, so it's not really a spoiler. He yells, well, like he ramps it up to 11 so quickly, and it's like I don't really buy that. Like I think he would have been more collect, like maybe I don't know if collect is the right word, but a bit more restrained when it comes to the yelling, at least for most of the conversation. It just feels like it happens too quickly. There's a point later in the movie where he yells and it feels more justified in the moment later in the movie. But overall, I loved this film. It felt like picking up a comic book, and you're in the middle of this rich history, this universe that already has a lot of stuff that have happened, all these other titles that have happened. You have a few other superheroes, but they don't feel like they make it feel less like a Superman movie. It's very much a Superman movie, and the people who work at the Daily Planet get more to do here than perhaps in any other Superman movie. um David Cornsweet, I think he did a great job. Tyler Hoechlin is still my personal favorite live action Superman, but I think David knocked it out of the park. Nicholas Holt might be my new favorite live action Lex Luthor, though. Michael Rosenbaum, with his performance and Smallville all those years ago, he sold it. But Nicholas Holt just brings more to this, and you get to see some alien characters or meta humans, meta human characters, powered characters, I guess I should say. And it doesn't feel too cluttered to me anyway. For others, I can see how it might be a bit cluttered, and this is maybe the first Superman solo movie where it could feel that way. But I really appreciate how this feels like a progression in the character's journey. It's not like how the first couple Superman movies would have a reset button at the end and you would be wondering, is Lois ever going to find out? Like, no, there's going to be progression. There's promise of a new uh, world built universe. I could word that better, I guess. So promise of more to come, more movies and characters to explore. There are inspirational moments. I really love the flag scene. If you've seen the film, you know what I'm talking about. And I know that some people won't like that the film feels very political, but I don't mind since it shows what's wrong with having empathy and kindness toward people. I think it's good for films to champion that as opposed to letting people in power who just want to be the strongest and the best and want to take other people down. I think it's better to just have empathy and be kind. This Superman movie really nails that, really brings that home. So yeah, I think this might have a bigger cultural impact, or people might resonate with this film more because of how they can compare it to some of the stuff that happens in real life these days. And Superman is a hero that we need more people like Superman. So yeah, Superman I would give an 8.5 out of 10. Really bright and colorful. Feels like reading a comic book. Yeah, I was just really into this. I think it's my favorite live action Superman movie. So now we get to the Fantastic Four First Steps. I really love the retrofuturism aesthetic of this world. This is Earth 828, so different from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The the sacred timeline. And I think it was smart of them to set it explicitly on another world. And yeah, we've had other Fantastic Four movies that take place on different Earths. You know, they're separate universes from the MCU as well. But I thought it was important for the introduction of the Fantastic Four in these Marvel movies, you know, the current stuff, for it to show them as front and center, being the protectors of the earth. And you really get that here, and how they seem like celebrities. People love them. You know, we're not early in their career. This is 4 years into their career. So again, dropping you into the middle of it, just like how the Superman movie was 3 years into his career. So I really like this strategy. I thought the opening montage explaining the Fantastic Four's origins was effective. You don't need a whole another film exploring their origin. I mean, when The Incredibles came out, nobody wanted or felt shortchanged that we didn't see how Mr. Incredible, Elastigirl, and Frozone got their powers. You just got to drop the audience into a good, compelling story, and I feel like they did that here. The actors really did a solid job as these characters. Ben Grimm is not struggling with like wondering if he's a monster or if he can fit in. It was so heartwarming seeing that you know, the people around really love him, and that's also why I love where the Hulk is now in the MCU. You know, everyone wants big, strong, smashing Hulk, but I love that he is at a place where he is at peace and accepted. You know, I love that progression. It doesn't just have to be, you know, being lonely and sad and smashing stuff, you know? So the plot of this movie, I guess you could say, is kind of a simple one. When you really take a step back, you know, if you've seen the movie and you summarize the movie, it is kind of a simple story, but it's one that was still so compelling to watch. There's a lot of talking, a lot of, you know, people talking to each other, trying to solve this problem with Galactus, and Galactus also has a Silver Surfer, which this is a different Silver Surfer from the one who's in the 2007 film, you know, Fantastic Four Rise of Silver Surfer. It's not a gender swapped character, it's a different Silver Surfer character who is also in the comics and just so happens to be a different gender. I love that we get her backstory. We get to know why she became the Silver Surfer, and it's a compelling explanation. I'll let you see yourselves. Human Torch is not annoying in this film. Like, yeah, he has these jokes here and there, but he and Ben Grimm really feel like fun bros. You know, it's like, you know, Reed and Sue are like the mom and dad in this family superhero team, and Johnny and Ben are kind of like the fun uncles. I really enjoyed that dynamic, and this Johnny is also more selfless. I think when people look back at Chris Evans' Johnny Storm in the 2000s Fantastic Four movies, they praise that portrayal, but maybe it's been so long since some of these people have seen those films. So I think when they praise that portrayal, they're praising how differently Chris Evans is able to portray characters, you know, playing a jerk ass Johnny Storm and playing a good Boy Scout Captain America Steve Rogers. Whereas, you know, if you were to analyze the characters, his jerk ass Johnny Storm is just not likable in that first movie from 2005. So I really appreciated the character work done here. Sue got more to do, like they really did her right. Uh, and you know, Pedro Pascal. I'm not tired of seeing Pedro Pascal and things. I enjoyed his portrayal of Reed Richards, though it is interesting how he keeps on, you know, multiple films and I guess TV as well. Plays characters who protect younger characters. It's kind of funny how he feels kind of typecast in that sense. But yeah, I really loved the way the Fantastic Four were depicted here and how Galactus, Silver Surfer, um, yeah, I was really invested in this Earth that we're presented with here, Earth 828, and named after Jack Kirby's date of birth. So yeah, this was I would give this Fantastic Four movie a 9 out of 10. So I prefer it slightly over Superman, but I think I'm in the minority. Um and it's just been so long and so many years without having a proper portrayal of the Fantastic Four that gets it this right. Whereas there have been some other Superman projects that already satisfied me in recent years, Superman and Lois, My Adventures with Superman. So maybe that's why I feel like at this time I give Fantastic Four the edge. And I think I also prefer it slightly over Thunderbolts. I really loved Thunderbolts, did a video on that. Um, what does it for me is Thunderbolts had a bit too much of Red Guardian, just going on with his dialogue that's there just to try to make people laugh when it feels like it just some of it could have just been cut. Here in this Fantastic Four movie, it doesn't feel like there's that try hard type of humor that I don't know what you would call it. That some of that sarcastic humor in MCU movies that can tend to go on too long sometimes, or that humor that feels too in your face. It really felt balanced, tone wise and just the progression of the story. Um, I can understand why people can have issues with stuff toward the end. It feels kind of goofy, but I loved this. I want to see more of this Fantastic Four. Now, does it make me more excited for the future MCU projects? Well, I don't feel excited about Doomsday still because of the Robert Downey Jr. of it all. It just feels silly to me. I am curious how Secret Wars will perhaps reset things. There's a part of me that wonders if they'll maybe merge the worlds and keep this retro futurist aesthetic. They'll integrate the X-Men somehow. Maybe they'll set the new MCU in a different year that's not necessarily where we are currently. Um, Maybe, I don't know, maybe it could reflect how things look in our world less so, but maybe closer to the time when if it's just a couple decades after Magneto's origin, maybe that solves a problem. Or for all I know, maybe they found a different creative way to solve the Magneto issue, if you can call it that. People constantly wondering how are they going to adapt Magneto? How old is he going to be? Yeah, I don't know. I'm curious how they'll approach that. But yeah, I mean, I'm still excited about Spider-Man: Brand New Day. But yeah, I haven't been as down about much of the MCU as others seem to be. There have been projects in the post Endgame stuff, a few things I thought were fine, and other things I thought were good or really good. The only things that really haven't satisfied me were Eternals, Thor: Love and Thunder, Multiverse of Madness. Yeah, Doctor Strange too. Um, Deadpool and Wolverine. I don't know. That one just felt like too much of a nostalgia fest. Maybe it came out a couple years too late, at a point where we were too used to that sort of thing. Moon Knight kind of left me cold, but yeah, I haven't been as down as other people have been on this stuff, but I am curious how things are going to be moving forward. And personally, I think that Marvel movies don't need to lean so much into an overarching story. They could just have solo movies and, just let the movie be the movie, let the story stand on its own. And occasionally there will be a crossover of sorts. You don't need to keep teasing huge things in mid or post credit scenes. That's what I liked about the Superman mid and post credit scene. It didn't feel like it was hammering you over the head with, oh, this is the overarching story that you'll have to keep an eye out over the next few years. But yeah, like I don't know, like I'm a bit more curious about the future of the DCU now. I'm really looking forward to the Supergirl movie, Peacemaker season two. I mean, I haven't been super into Peacemaker, but the trailer showing that that's gonna explore the multiverse, I guess the connection between maybe the DCEU and the DCU, uh, potentially that intrigues me. But yeah, I'd say at the moment, because we know a little bit more, or I guess I don't know, maybe it's just my perspective. I haven't been looking up too much, but it feels like there's a bit more that we know about upcoming DC stuff. Whereas some of the upcoming Marvel stuff is a little bit of a mystery. But I'm curious to see what happens with either of these universes. I'm a fan of both Marvel and DC, and I want to see some of these characters and where they end up. So, yeah, this is a pretty solid summer of comic book movies. I know there are criticisms here and there of them, but personally, I really enjoyed these films. So I'm really happy with Superman and the Fantastic Four First Steps. All right, so I guess that's it for this video. Thanks for tuning in to Steven Shinder Reviews in video form, and I'll see you all soon.